On September 11, 2001, one of the most devastating acts of terrorism in modern history took place. 19 hijackers, working under the direction of a single terrorist mastermind, transformed commercial airliners into weapons of mass destruction, killing nearly 3,000 innocent people in New York, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania. The attacks fundamentally changed the course of world history, triggering wars, reshaping global security, and altering the way nations approach terrorism. Yet, this catastrophic event did not materialize overnight. It was a culmination of decades of planning, radicalization, and calculated violence orchestrated primarily by one man, Osama bin Laden. This is a story of how a wealthy Saudi millionaire transformed into the world's most wanted terrorist, and how his twisted vision led to horror of 9/11. The roots of bin Laden's eventual path to terrorism trace back to his privileged upbringing in one of Saudi Arabia's wealthiest families. Osama bin Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden was born on March 10, 1957, in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. He was the 17th child among 54 children born to Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden, a self-made billionaire construction magnate. Mohammed bin Laden had emigrated from Yemen to Saudi Arabia before World War I, arriving as a poor, uneducated laborer from the Hadramaut region of eastern Yemen. Through determination and shrewd business acumen, Mohammed established a construction company that would become one of the largest in the Middle East by the time of his death in 1967. The bin Laden family's rise to prominence was intimately connected with the Saudi royal family. Mohammed bin Laden's company was awarded exclusive contracts to construct and renovate mosques and other religious buildings throughout Saudi Arabia and beyond, including major renovations at the holy sites of Mecca and Medina, and even restoration work at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. This close relationship with the Saudi monarchy would later become a source of bitter conflict for his son Osama. By the time Mohammed bin Laden died in an airplane crash in 1967, when Osama was just 10 years old, the family had amassed an enormous fortune and wielded considerable influence throughout the kingdom. Osama's mother, Hamida al-Adas, was Muhammad's 10th wife, a Syrian woman who divorced shortly after Osama's birth. She was subsequently married to one of Muhammad's company executives, Muhammad al-Adas, who became Osama's stepfather. Within the large bin Laden family hierarchy, Osama's position was somewhat marginal. His mother, as a foreigner and one of many wives, held relatively low status within the family structure. Some family members reportedly refer to her as the slave and Osama as Ibn al-Abida, son of the slave. This sense of outsider status within his own wealthy family may have contributed to Osama's later psychological development and his search for identity and belonging. Despite any family tensions, young Osama grew up in considerable comfort and privilege. He attended elite private schools in Jeddah, the cosmopolitan port city on the Red Sea, where much of the bin Laden family was based. Unlike many of his siblings who were educated in the West and later worked for the family's vast business conglomerate, which distributed consumer goods across the Middle East, Osama remained closer to home, both geographically and culturally. He was described by those who knew him during his youth as shy, quiet, and devout, quite different from the fearsome terrorist leader he would later. As a teenager, bin Laden became increasingly interested in Islamic fundamentalism. At around age 17, he married his first cousin, Najwa Ghanem, who was 14 at the time, in what would be the first of multiple marriages that would eventually produce more than 20 children. During his teenage years, bin Laden joined the Muslim Brotherhood, an Islamist organization that promoted fundamentalist religious values and political activism. This early exposure to political Islam would prove formative in shaping his worldview. In the mid-1970s, bin Laden enrolled at King Abdul Aziz University in Jeddah, where he studied business administration and likely economics. However, his university years proved far more significant for his ideological development than his formal studies. At King Abdul Aziz, bin Laden encountered two men who would profoundly influence his future path: Muhammad Qutb, brother of the famous Islamic theorist Sayyid Qutb, and Abdul Azam, a Palestinian militant leader and Islamic scholar. Sayyid Qutb's writings had argued that the Muslim world had fallen into a state of Jahiliyyah, pre-Islamic ignorance, and that a vanguard of righteous Muslims was needed to establish true Islamic states and rid the Muslim world of non-Muslim influences, including what he perceived as a Jewish conspiracy against Islam. Abdullah Azzam became especially important to bin Laden's radicalization. Azzam, who had fled the West Bank after Israel's victory in the 1967 Six-Day War, was a charismatic teacher and militant who advocated for jihad against Israel and, later, against the Soviet Union. He developed the concept of defensive jihad as a religious obligation for all Muslims when Muslim lands were under attack. Azzam's teachings emphasized that Muslims should fight one truly global jihad against their enemies, rather than many separate national struggles. This vision of a worldwide Islamic struggle will become central to al-Qaeda's ideology. Bin Laden's time at the university provided him not only with radical religious views, but also with skills in marketing and organization that would later prove crucial in building al-Qaeda as a terrorist network. The event that truly transformed Osama bin Laden from a wealthy, somewhat radicalized young Saudi into an active jihadist was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in December 1979. After leaving university that year, bin Laden witnessed the Soviet Union send troops into Afghanistan to prop up a failing communist government. The invasion provoked outrage not only throughout the Muslim world, but also among Western powers, particularly the United States, which saw an opportunity to inflict damage on its Cold War adversary. For bin Laden and millions of other Muslims, the Soviet invasion represented an attack on Islam itself, an atheist superpower occupying Muslim land. Shortly after the invasion, bin Laden traveled to Pakistan to join the resistance. There he reunited with Abdullah Azzam, who was organizing Arab volunteers to join the Afghan Mujahideen fighting the Soviets. This partnership between bin Laden and Azzam would prove to be the germ of today's al-Qaeda, using his substantial inherited wealth. Estimates suggest he received between $25 million and $30 million from his father's fortune. Bin Laden began financing the jihad effort, purchasing weapons and construction equipment from his family's company to help the Mujahideen. In 1984, bin Laden and Azzam co-founded Maktab al-Khidmat, also known as the Afghan Services Bureau. This organization established a network of recruiting offices around the world, including in the United States, with a hub at the Al-Kifa Refugee Center in Brooklyn. MAK set up guest houses in Peshawar, Pakistan, near the Afghan border, where foreign volunteers could stay before receiving training and being sent into Afghanistan. The organization raised funds from wealthy donors in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, and coordinated the arrival of thousands of foreign fighters who became known as the Afghan Arabs. Between 1982 and 1992, approximately 35,000 Muslim volunteers from 43 countries traveled to Afghanistan to join the jihad against the Soviets, though typically no more than 2,000 were in the field at any one time. Bin Laden played a central role in organizing training camps for these foreign fighters, though the camps and combat operations were largely run by Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence Agency. While the CIA and United States provided billions of dollars in funding and weapons to the Afghan resistance through Operation Cyclone, there is no credible evidence that bin Laden personally received direct CIA funding or training, despite conspiracy theories to the contrary. Most experts agree that while some of bin Laden's associates and allies did receive U.S. support through Pakistani channels, bin Laden operated primarily within Saudi intelligence networks. In 1987, bin Laden participated in the Battle of Jaji, where a small force of Arab fighters held off a Soviet advance. Though accounts vary about bin Laden's actual role in the battle, it was portrayed as a great victory in Arab media, and bin Laden emerged as something of a celebrity in the Arab world, a wealthy Saudi who had sacrificed his comfortable life to fight alongside the Mujahideen against a superpower. This reputation as a hero of jihad would prove invaluable in his later efforts to recruit and inspire followers. As the Soviet-Afghan War dragged on to the 1980s, bin Laden began to develop a vision that extended beyond Afghanistan. In August 1988, at a meeting in Afghanistan attended by bin Laden, Azzam, and leaders of Egyptian Islamic Jihad, including Ayman al-Zawahiri, a decision was made to create a new organization that would continue the jihad after the Soviets were defeated. They called this organization Al-Qaeda, meaning the base. The concept derived from Azzam's writings about creating a solid base, or vanguard of committed Muslims, who would wage armed jihad globally to liberate oppressed Muslims and establish Islamic states governed by Sharia law. Documents seized years later indicate that al-Qaeda was formally established as an organization by August 20th, 1988. The group created a list of membership requirements that included listening ability, good manners, obedience, and making a pledge of loyalty to follow one's superiors. Bin Laden was positioned as the organization's leader and primary financier, with a small advisory council of trusted associates. However, the relationship between Bin Laden and Azzam soon became strained. Azzam advocated for a more moderate approach, wanted to integrate Arab fighters among Afghan groups, and focused the jihad on helping Muslims in specific conflict zones. Bin Laden, influenced increasingly by the more radical Ayman al-Zawahiri, wanted Arab fighters to form their own separate force and envisioned a more aggressive global campaign that would include attacking apostate Muslim governments. On November 24th, 1989, Abdullah Azzam was assassinated in Peshawar by a bomb blast that also killed two of his sons. The perpetrators were never identified, though suspicions fell on various parties, including Jordanian intelligence, rival Mujahideen factions, and even Bin Laden himself, given their ideological split. With Azzam dead, Bin Laden assumed complete control of al-Qaeda as its general emir, and the organization's direction became firmly aligned with al-Zawahiri's more extreme ideology of takfir, declaring other Muslims as apostates and legitimate targets for violence. In February 1989, the Soviet Union completed its withdrawal from Afghanistan, defeated after a decade of costly warfare. The Mujahideen victory was celebrated throughout the Muslim world, and many attributed the superpower's defeat to divine intervention and the dedication of the Muslim fighters. Bin Laden returned to Saudi Arabia in 1989 as a celebrated hero of jihad. He had seen how a determined insurgency armed with relatively simple weapons and strong ideological commitment could bring down a superpower. This lesson would shape his thinking for years to come. The Soviet Union's eventual dissolution in 1991 only reinforced his belief that dedicated jihadists could defeat seemingly invincible opponents. However, Bin Laden's homecoming to Saudi Arabia was not to last long. In August 1990, Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and Iraqi forces massed along the Saudi border, threatening the oil-rich kingdom. Bin Laden approached the Saudi government with an offer. He would mobilize his network of Arab Afghan veterans, perhaps 100,000 fighters within 3 months, to defend Saudi Arabia from the Iraqi threat. There would be no need for non-Muslim foreign troops on Saudi soil. The Saudi defense minister, Prince Sultan, was skeptical. "There are no caves in Kuwait," he reportedly replied, dismissing Bin Laden's guerrilla warfare expertise as inadequate for conventional warfare. Instead, the Saudi government accepted an offer from the United States to deploy hundreds of thousands of American and coalition troops to Saudi Arabia as part of Operation Desert Shield, which would later become Operation Desert Storm. At its peak, some 550,000 coalition troops, mostly American, were based in the Saudi desert. The deployment of these infidel troops to Saudi Arabia, home to Islam's two holiest sites, Mecca and Medina, would become the central grievance that drove Bin Laden's subsequent war against the United States. Bin Laden was outraged by what he viewed as a betrayal by the Saudi royal family. In his view, the presence of non-Muslim soldiers on Saudi soil was a defilement of sacred Islamic territory, and the Saudi government's reliance on American protection rather than trusting in Muslim fighters was a humiliating submission to Western power. He began speaking out publicly against the Saudi monarchy, criticizing their corruption and un-Islamic practices. In 1991, the Saudi government placed Bin Laden under virtual house arrest. Later that year, he managed to leave the country. Some accounts suggest his well-connected family helped him slip away, while others claim the government was happy to be rid of a troublesome critic. Bin Laden relocated to Sudan in late 1991 or early 1992, welcomed by the country's Islamist government led by Hassan al-Turabi and military strongman Omar al-Bashir. During his time in Sudan, Bin Laden established extensive business operations, investing in agriculture, construction, and infrastructure projects. He built roads using the same bulldozers he had employed in Afghanistan, and many of his workers were former Mujahideen. He bought houses in Khartoum and a retreat along the Blue Nile. Despite appearing to settle into legitimate business activities, Bin Laden was simultaneously building the infrastructure of al-Qaeda as a terrorist network. During the early 1990s in Sudan, bin Laden and al-Qaeda began formulating plans for a violent campaign against what they saw as the primary threat to the Muslim world, the United States and its Western allies. Bin Laden established training camps where recruits from around the world learned bomb-making, weapons handling, and guerrilla tactics. The organization developed a cell-based structure that allowed for decentralized operations while maintaining ideological unity. Al-Qaeda also began providing support and coordination for militant Islamist groups in various conflicts, including sending fighters to support the Bosnian Muslims during the Bosnian War in the 1990s. Bin Laden's growing notoriety and Sudan's increasing international isolation led to pressure on the Sudanese government. In 1994, Saudi Arabia revoked bin Laden's citizenship and froze his family's financial support, cutting off his annual stipend of approximately $7 million. However, al-Qaeda continued to receive clandestine funding from wealthy donors throughout the Persian Gulf. In May 1996, under heavy international pressure and facing American sanctions, Sudan expelled bin Laden. He returned to Afghanistan, now partially controlled by the Taliban, an Islamic fundamentalist movement that had emerged from the chaos of Afghanistan's post-Soviet civil war. The Taliban, led by Mullah Muhammad Omar, welcomed bin Laden and provided him sanctuary. In return, bin Laden provided financial support, and his Arab fighters helped the Taliban in their conquest of Afghanistan. Bin Laden received protection from the Taliban and was allowed to establish a network of training camps across Afghanistan. These camps would train thousands of militants who would go on to participate in terrorist operations worldwide. The relationship between al-Qaeda and the Taliban would endure through the late 1990s and would ultimately prove the Taliban's undoing. On August 23, 1996, from his new base in Afghanistan, bin Laden issued his first fatwa declaring war on the United States. The document, titled Declaration of War Against the Americans Occupying the Land of the Two Holy Places, focused primarily on the presence of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia. Bin Laden called on Muslims worldwide to drive American forces out of the Arabian Peninsula. This was not merely rhetoric. Al-Qaeda was already planning operations. On February 23, 1998, bin Laden escalated his declarations with a new fatwa published in the Arabic newspaper Al-Quds Al-Arabi. This time, bin Laden spoke on behalf of the World Islamic Front for Jihad against Jews and Crusaders, co-signed by Ayman al-Zawahiri and leaders of other militant groups. The 1998 fatwa was far more explicit and deadly in its intent. To kill Americans and their allies, both civil and military, is an individual duty of every Muslim who is able in any country. The fatwa listed three main grievances: the American military presence in Saudi Arabia, U.S. support for Israel and the oppression of Palestinians, and the economic sanctions against Iraq following the 1991 Gulf War, which bin Laden claimed had killed over 600,000 Iraqi children. These were not empty threats. Al-Qaeda had already been involved in attacks against American interests. In December 1992, bombs exploded at hotels in Yemen where U.S. troops had stayed during operations in Somalia. In 1993, al-Qaeda members had connections to the first World Trade Center bombing, carried out by Ramzi Youssef, the nephew of al-Qaeda planner Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. That attack killed 6 people and injured over 1,000, but failed to bring down the towers as intended. The 1993 bombing was, in many ways, a harbinger of the much deadlier attack that would come 8 years later. However, it was the attacks of August 7, 1998, that would truly announce al-Qaeda as a major threat to American security. On that day, truck bombs exploded nearly simultaneously at U.S. embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. The date was carefully chosen. It marked the 8th anniversary of the arrival of American troops in Saudi Arabia. The bombings were meticulously planned operations that demonstrated al-Qaeda's capacity for coordinated international terrorism. In Nairobi, the bomb killed 213 people and wounded approximately 4,000. In Dar es Salaam, 11 were killed and 85 injured. The vast majority of victims were African civilians, many of them Muslims, a grim pattern that would characterize much of al-Qaeda's terrorism. Only 12 Americans were among the dead. The embassy bombings shocked the United States and the international community. The FBI deployed nearly 200 agents to investigate, and within weeks had linked the attacks directly to bin Laden and al-Qaeda. On November 4th, 1998, federal prosecutors in New York indicted bin Laden and 21 others for the embassy bombings and conspiracy to kill Americans worldwide. Bin Laden was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. The Clinton administration responded to the attacks with Operation Infinite Reach, launching cruise missile strikes on August 20th, 1998, against suspected al-Qaeda facilities in Afghanistan and a pharmaceutical plant in Sudan that the U.S. believed was producing chemical weapons for bin Laden. However, the strikes missed bin Laden and largely failed to disrupt al-Qaeda's operations. The relatively weak response may have emboldened bin Laden in his belief that America was a paper tiger that would not sustain a serious confrontation. Al-Qaeda's next major attack came on October 12, 2000, against the USS Cole, a guided missile destroyer that was refueling in the Yemeni port of Aden. Two suicide bombers in a small boat laden with explosives approached the ship and detonated their payload alongside the Cole's hull, blowing a 40-foot hole in the side of the destroyer. 17 U.S. sailors were killed and 37 wounded. The attack had actually been preceded by a failed attempt on January 3, 2000, against another destroyer, the USS the Sullivans, but that boat had been so overloaded with explosives that it sank before reaching its target. The Cole bombing was a significant escalation, representing a direct military attack on a U.S. warship. Yet the American response remained limited. The Clinton administration, in its final months, launched an investigation but did not take significant military action. When the Bush administration took office in January 2001, it inherited warnings about al-Qaeda, but initially did not prioritize the threat as highly as it should have. As National Security Advisor Sandy Berger would later testify, dealing with al-Qaeda was like swatting flies. The threat seemed persistent but manageable through law enforcement and occasional military strikes, rather than recognizing it as an existential challenge requiring a comprehensive strategy. While these attacks were unfolding, bin Laden was supervising the planning of his most ambitious and devastating operation yet. The plan that would culminate in the September 11th attacks had its origins in the mid-1990s. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, an experienced terrorist who had helped finance the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and had planned Operation Bojinka, a 1995 plot to bomb multiple airliners simultaneously, approached al-Qaeda's leadership with a bold new proposal. Mohammed suggested hijacking multiple aircraft on both the U.S. East and West Coasts and flying them into prominent American landmarks. Bin Laden approved the plan and assigned Mohammed as the operations principal architect. The plot required pilots capable of flying commercial aircraft, and al-Qaeda found them in a cell of radicalized Muslims living in Hamburg, Germany. Mohammed Atta, an Egyptian studying urban planning, emerged as the leader of what became known as the Hamburg Cell. Born in 1968, Atta had come to Germany in 1992 to pursue graduate studies. While in Hamburg, he attended the Al-Quds Mosque, where he connected with other young Muslims, including Marwan al-Shehi from the United Arab Emirates, Ziad Jarrah from Lebanon, and Ramzi bin al-Shib from Yemen. These men became increasingly radicalized, influenced by the teachings of Abdullah Azzam and the ideology of global jihad. In late 1999, Atta, al-Shehi, and Jarrah traveled to Afghanistan, where they met with bin Laden and other al-Qaeda leaders. Bin Laden, recognizing their potential due to their Western education, language skills, and ability to blend into Western society, personally selected them for the plane's operation. Mohammed Atta was immediately placed in command of the entire plot. The three men, along with Hani Hanjour, a Saudi Arabian who joined later, would become the four pilots who would fly the hijacked planes into their targets. After receiving basic training in al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan, the pilots returned to the West to prepare for their mission. Beginning in June 2000, they entered the United States and enrolled in flight schools. Atta and al-Shehi trained at Huffman Aviation in Venice, Florida, while Jarrah trained at a different Florida flight school. Hanjour, who already had some flight experience, took additional training in Arizona. The pilots obtained instrument ratings and logged hours on flight simulators for large commercial aircraft, though their instructors later recalled that their flying skills were surprisingly limited for their level of training. Throughout 2000 and early 2001, The pilots moved around the United States, taking surveillance flights, testing airline security procedures, and working out the logistics of the attack. In July 2001, Mohammed Atta traveled to Spain to meet with Ramzi bin al-Shibh, who served as a coordinator between the pilots in the United States and al-Qaeda leadership in Afghanistan. Bin al-Shibh had attempted to obtain a visa to enter the United States multiple times, but had been rejected, possibly preventing him from being one of the hijackers himself. During the meeting in Spain, Atta and bin al-Shibh finalized the details of the attack. Bin al-Shibh conveyed messages from bin Laden, including his desire for the attacks to be carried out as soon as possible. Bin Laden was concerned about operation security, with so many operatives inside the United States. Atta reported that all preparations were nearly complete, and that he needed just a few more weeks. They confirmed the target list: the World Trade Center, New York, representing America's economic power; the Pentagon, representing its military might; and the U.S. Capitol building, representing its government. If pilots could not reach their primary targets, they were instructed simply to crash the planes. Meanwhile, the muscle hijackers, the men who would physically take control of the aircraft and subdue passengers and crew, were being recruited and prepared. Between April and June 2001, 15 young men, mostly Saudi Arabians in their 20s, entered the United States on tourist visas. Most came in pairs or small groups. They were younger, less educated, and more physically intimidating than the pilots. According to later testimony, many of the muscle hijackers did not know they were on a suicide mission until the day of the attacks. They believed they were participating in traditional hijackings, where hostages would be taken and demands would be negotiated. The hijackers' ability to enter the United States and move freely within the country revealed significant failures in America's counterterrorism and border security systems. While the CIA had information about some of the hijackers, particularly Khalid al-Midhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, this information was not properly shared with other agencies. The hijackers' names were never placed on terrorist watch lists that would have prevented their entry. At least 2 of the hijackers were interviewed during visa applications, but consular officers were not trained to detect potential terrorists. 13 of the hijackers presented passports less than 3 weeks old when applying for visas, but this raised no red flags. On August 23, 2001, less than 3 weeks before the attacks, Israeli Mossad intelligence provided the American government with a list of 19 names of individuals suspected of planning an attack against the United States. The list included Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Shayhi, Khalid al-Midhar, and Nawaf al-Hazmi. Whether the list was complete or its length coincidental has never been fully clarified, but the warning was not acted upon in time. As September 2001 approached, the hijackers made their final preparations. They purchased tickets on 4 morning flights on September 11th, all transcontinental flights from the East Coast to California, selected because they would be carrying heavy fuel loads that would maximize the destructive power of the crashes. On September 10th, several of the hijackers made final surveillance trips to airports. Mohammed Atta and Abdul Aziz Al-Omari drove from Boston to Portland, Maine, spending the night at a hotel. They would take an early morning flight back to Boston to connect to American Airlines Flight 11, adding an extra flight to their journey for reasons that remain unclear. The morning of September 11, 2001, dawned clear and beautiful along the eastern seaboard. At 5:45 a.m., Mohammed Atta and Al-Omari passed through security at the Portland International Jetport. They boarded a commuter flight to Boston, where they arrived at Logan International Airport just after 6 a.m. At various airports that morning, 19 hijackers passed through security checkpoints. They carried box cutters and utility knives, not illegal to carry on planes at that time. Some may have also brought fake bombs to intimidate passengers and crew. At 7:59 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767 carrying 81 passengers, 5 flight attendants and 2 pilots, departed Boston Logan bound for Los Angeles. Mohammed Atta and 4 other hijackers were aboard, seated in first class and business class. 15 minutes later, at 8:14 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175, also a Boeing 767 from Boston to Los Angeles, took off with 56 passengers, 7 crew members, and 5 hijackers, including pilot Marwan al-Shayhi. At 8:20 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757 with 58 passengers and crew, departed Washington Dulles International Airport for Los Angeles with 5 hijackers, including pilot Hani Hanjour. Finally, at 8:42 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93, a Boeing 757 from Newark to San Francisco, took off with 37 passengers and crew, delayed by 25 minutes due to routine air traffic. 4 hijackers, including pilot Ziad Jarrah, were aboard. At approximately 8:14 a.m., the hijackers on Flight 11 made their move. They stabbed and killed both pilots and at least 2 flight attendants, and moved passengers and remaining crew to the back of the aircraft. At 8:24 a.m., Mohammed Atta attempted to communicate with the passengers, but accidentally broadcast over air traffic control frequency. "We have some planes. Just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We are returning to the airport." Flight attendant Betty Ong managed to call American Airlines operations, reporting the hijacking and providing the seat numbers of the hijackers, which immediately identified Mohammed Atta. At 8:37 a.m., Boston Air Traffic Control alerted the military's northeast defense sector of the hijacking. Fighter jets were scrambled, but in the confusion and lack of protocols for such an attack, they did not know where to go. At 8:46 and 40 seconds a.m., American Airlines Flight 11, traveling at approximately 465 miles per hour, crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center between the 93rd and 99th floors. The impact instantly killed everyone aboard the aircraft and an unknown number of people inside the building. The crash also severed all the stairwells in the tower above the impact zone, trapping approximately 1,360 people on the upper floors. Initially, many observers believed the crash was a terrible accident, perhaps a navigation error. That illusion was shattered at 9:03 and 11 seconds a.m. when United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center between the 77th and 85th floors. As millions watched live on television, the second impact made it unmistakably clear that America was under attack. The aircraft had been traveling at approximately 590 miles per hour. Like the North Tower, all stairwells were severed, trapping approximately 600 people above the impact zone. The attacks triggered chaos and confusion throughout the nation's air traffic system. American Airlines Flight 77 had been hijacked at approximately 8:51 a.m., with the hijackers killing the pilots and slashing the throat of a flight attendant. The aircraft made an unauthorized turn toward Washington, D.C. Despite radar tracking and attempts to intercept, at 9:37:46 seconds a.m., Flight 77 crashed into the western side of the Pentagon, the headquarters of the U.S. Department of Defense, at 530 miles per hour. The impact killed all 59 people aboard the aircraft and 125 people in the Pentagon. On United Airlines Flight 93, the hijacking began at approximately 9:28 a.m., later than the others due to the flight's delayed departure. By this time, passengers and crew were receiving phone calls from family members informing them about the other hijackings and crashes. Realizing they were on a suicide mission, a group of passengers and crew members made the decision to fight back. Led by passengers including Todd Beamer, who famously said, "Let's roll," they charged the cockpit. In the struggle, at 10:03 and 11 seconds a.m., the hijackers crashed Flight 93 into an empty field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, killing all 40 passengers and crew. Evidence suggests the hijackers' intended target was either the White House or the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Back in New York, the unthinkable was happening. The intense fires from the jet fuel and burning office contents weakened the steel structure of the World Trade Center towers. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed in approximately 10 seconds, crushing and killing many of the firefighters and rescue workers who had rushed to help. At 10:28 and 25 seconds a.m., the North Tower collapsed. The collapse of the towers killed hundreds of firefighters, police officers, and emergency medical technicians who had been attempting rescues, along with many civilians who were still inside or nearby. The collapse created massive clouds of debris and dust that covered lower Manhattan. When the chaos finally ended, the death toll was staggering. A total of 2,977 people had been killed, not counting the 19 hijackers. This included 246 people aboard the 4 aircraft, 2,606 at the World Trade Center and surrounding area, and 125 at the Pentagon. The dead came from more than 90 nations. Among them were 343 firefighters, 72 law enforcement officers, and 55 military personnel at the Pentagon. At the World Trade Center, many people trapped above the impact zones have been forced to make the horrific choice of jumping from the buildings to escape the flames and smoke. The youngest victim was a 2-year-old girl on Flight 175. The oldest was an 85-year-old man on Flight 11. Within hours of the attacks, investigators identified the hijackers. They made little attempt to disguise their identities. Their names were on passenger manifests, and they had used credit cards and identification in their real names. Mohammed Atta's luggage, which did not make his connecting flight from Portland to Boston, was recovered and contained crucial evidence, including the identities of all 19 hijackers, flight training materials, and instructional. On the day of the attacks, U.S. intelligence agencies intercepted communications pointing to bin Laden's responsibility. President George W. Bush wrote in his diary that night, "The Pearl Harbor of the 21st century took place today. We think it's Osama bin Laden." Within days, the evidence linking al-Qaeda and bin Laden to the attacks was deemed clear and irrefutable by the FBI and intelligence agencies worldwide. On September 20th, 2001, President Bush addressed a joint session of Congress and demanded that the Taliban government of Afghanistan hand over bin Laden and other al-Qaeda leaders, close all terrorist training camps, and give the United States access to investigate al-Qaeda's activities. The Taliban refused. On October 7, 2001, the United States launched Operation Enduring Freedom, invading Afghanistan with the goal of destroying al-Qaeda and removing the Taliban from power. The campaign was initially successful, with the Taliban regime falling by December 2001. However, bin Laden managed to escape, likely fleeing into the mountainous region along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. For nearly a decade, bin Laden evaded capture, becoming the world's most wanted man with a $25 million bounty on his head. U.S. intelligence agencies conducted an exhaustive manhunt, but bin Laden remained at large, releasing occasional audio and video messages that demonstrated he was still alive. In August 2010, U.S. intelligence developed information that bin Laden was likely living in a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, a city about 100 miles north of Islamabad and home to a Pakistani military academy. After months of surveillance and planning, President Barack Obama authorized a raid on the compound. On May 2, 2011, U.S. Navy SEALs from the elite Devgri unit conducted a nighttime helicopter assault on bin Laden's compound. In a firefight lasting about 40 minutes, the SEALs killed bin Laden. His body was identified through DNA testing and facial recognition, then buried at sea within 24 hours in accordance with Islamic tradition. The death of Osama bin Laden marked the end of a nearly decade-long manhunt, but did not end the terrorist threat he had created. The September 11 attacks fundamentally changed the course of world history in ways that continue to reverberate today. The immediate aftermath saw the United States launch the War on Terror, a global campaign against terrorist organizations that would span multiple continents and cost trillions of dollars. The invasion of Afghanistan in October 2001 became America's longest war, lasting 20 years until U.S. forces finally withdrew in August 2021, ironically seeing the Taliban return to power. The attacks also led indirectly to the 2003 invasion of Iraq, based on claims that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction and had links to al-Qaeda. While these claims were later proven false, the Iraq War destabilized the entire Middle East, leading to hundreds of thousands of deaths and creating conditions that would later give rise to ISIS, an even more brutal terrorist organization that emerged from the chaos. The combined cost of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have been estimated at over $6 trillion, with approximately 7,000 U.S. military deaths and hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties in both countries. Within the United States, 9/11 transformed domestic security and civil liberties. In October 2001, Congress passed the USA Patriot Act, dramatically expanding the government's surveillance powers. The Department of Homeland Security was created in 2002, consolidating 22 federal agencies into the third largest cabinet department. The Transportation Security Administration transformed air travel, implementing security screening procedures that persist today. Intelligence agencies received vastly expanded budgets and authorities, including programs for warrantless surveillance of American citizens that would later be revealed by whistleblower Edward Snowden. The attacks also had profound social and cultural impacts. Hate crimes against Muslims, Arabs, and those perceived to be Middle Eastern increased dramatically in the months and years following 9/11. The FBI reported a 1,600% increase in hate crimes against Muslims between 2000 and 2001. Mosques were vandalized, Muslim Americans faced discrimination in employment and housing, and many experienced harassment and violence simply because of their faith or ethnicity. This Islamophobia became a defining feature of American society in the post-9/11 era, fueling political debates about immigration, refugee policy, and religious freedom. The financial cost of the attacks themselves was staggering, beyond the human toll. The immediate economic impact included the destruction of the Twin Towers and adjacent buildings, which cost an estimated $60 billion in property damage and cleanup costs. The stock market closed for 4 trading days, the longest shutdown since the Great Depression, and when it reopened, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 684 points, or 7.1%. The attacks devastated the airline and tourism industries, leading to massive layoffs. The total economic impact has been estimated at over $3 trillion when accounting for the attacks themselves, rescue and recovery operations, and the broader economic disruption. New York City was transformed. Ground Zero became a scar on the Manhattan landscape, and cleanup operations continued for months. The massive pile of rubble contained human remains, and recovery workers developed respiratory illnesses from exposure to toxic dust and debris. The September 11th Victim Compensation Fund has paid out over $8.5 billion to victims and their families, and the World Trade Center Health Program continues to treat thousands of first responders and survivors who develop cancers and other illnesses linked to exposure at Ground Zero. The site where the Twin Towers stood is now home to the National September 11th Memorial and Museum and One World Trade Center at 1,776 feet, the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere. Al-Qaeda itself was severely degraded in the years following 9/11, but never completely destroyed. The organization lost its safe haven in Afghanistan, and many of its senior leaders were killed or captured in the subsequent years. Bin Laden's death in 2011 was a symbolic victory, but by that time, Al-Qaeda had metastasized into a global movement with franchises operating in North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, South Asia, and elsewhere. Groups pledging allegiance to Al-Qaeda conducted attacks in Madrid in 2004, London in 2005, and numerous other locations around the world. The rise of ISIS in 2014 presented an even greater challenge. While ISIS emerged from Al-Qaeda in Iraq and initially maintained ties to bin Laden's organization, the groups eventually split over ideological differences and competition for leadership of the global jihadist movement. ISIS proved even more brutal and effective at territorial conquest than Al-Qaeda, at its peak controlling territory the size of Britain across Syria and Iraq. Though ISIS's territorial caliphate has been largely destroyed, the organization continues to carry out terrorist attacks and maintains affiliates worldwide. Looking back over 2 decades, the September 11 attacks stand as a watershed moment that divided history into before and after. For Americans who lived through it, the attacks are seared into memory, where they were when they heard the news, watching the towers fall on television, the eerie silence of skies when all flights were grounded. For younger generations born after September 11th, the attacks and their aftermath have shaped the world they inherited. Perpetual war in the Middle East, heightened security at airports, ongoing debates about surveillance and civil liberties, and complicated questions about America. The man who set all of this in motion, Osama bin Laden, was in many ways a study in contradictions. He was born into immense wealth and privilege, yet chose a life of hardship in caves and compounds. He was soft-spoken and polite in person, yet responsible for orchestrating mass murder. He claimed to act in defense of Islam and Muslims, yet the vast majority of his victims were Muslim civilians. He positioned himself as a defender of the oppressed, yet his actions brought catastrophic destruction to the very people and regions he claimed to champion. Bin Laden's ideology was a perversion of Islamic teaching, one rejected by the overwhelming majority of Islamic scholars and Muslims worldwide. Islam, like other major world religions, has clear prohibitions against the killing of innocents, the deliberate targeting of civilians, particularly through suicide attacks, is condemned in Islamic jurisprudence. Yet bin Laden and his followers constructed a theological framework that justified such violence, drawing on selective and distorted interpretations of religious texts and exploiting genuine grievances in the Muslim world. From the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to Western support for authoritarian Arab regimes to the presence of foreign troops in Muslim lands. Understanding how bin Laden came to orchestrate 9/11 requires examining multiple factors that converge in his life. His family background gave him wealth and connections. His education introduced him to radical ideologies. The Soviet-Afghan War provided him with practical experience in armed conflict and convinced him that superpowers could be defeated. The Gulf War and the stationing of American troops in Saudi Arabia gave him a cause. His time in Sudan and then Afghanistan gave him the freedom to plan and organize. The failure of U.S. intelligence and security agencies gave him the opportunity, and his willingness to murder thousands of innocents gave him the means to execute his vision. Yet bin Laden did not act alone. The September 11 attacks required the participation of 19 hijackers who were willing to die for his cause. It required the coordination of dozens of planners and facilitators who provided money, documents, training, and logistics. It required a support network that extended across continents. And it required an ideology that could motivate educated, often middle-class young men, to commit suicide while murdering thousands. The Hamburg cell members, Atta, Al-Shehi, and Jarrah, were university students who had opportunities for normal, prosperous lives. Yet they chose to become mass murderers. The radicalization process that transforms individuals from ordinary people into terrorists remains imperfectly understood. Research has shown that there is no single profile of a terrorist. They come from various backgrounds, education levels, and social classes. What they tend to share is a sense of grievance, personal, political, or religious, combined with exposure to extremist ideology, often facilitated by a charismatic leader or tight-knit group that provides a sense of purpose and belonging. Social networks play a crucial role. Many terrorists radicalize in groups, reinforcing each other's beliefs and commitment. The internet and social media have made this process easier, allowing extremist propaganda to reach vulnerable individuals worldwide. In bin Laden's case, his charisma and status as a veteran of the Afghan Jihad made him a powerful recruiter. His wealth allowed him to fund operations and take care of fighters' families. His religious rhetoric provided moral justification for violence. And his strategic vision, that spectacular attacks on the United States would galvanize the Muslim world into joining a global jihad, gave his followers a sense they were part of a historic struggle. That this vision proved delusional. The Muslim world overwhelmingly condemned 9/11, and the attacks brought catastrophic consequences to Muslim-majority countries, did not prevent it from motivating his followers. The legacy of Osama bin Laden is one of destruction, suffering, and wasted potential. The nearly 3,000 people killed on September 11th included people from all walks of life: stockbrokers and janitors, firefighters and office workers, Muslims and Christians and Jews, Americans and citizens of 90 other nations. Each had families, friends, dreams, and futures that were stolen from them. The hundreds of thousands who died in the wars that followed, American soldiers, Afghan and Iraqi civilians, aid workers, journalists, are also part of bin Laden's legacy. The civil liberties eroded in the name of security, the billions spent on military campaigns rather than education or health care, the sectarian violence unleashed across the Middle East, all trace back to that clear September morning in 2001. But alongside the destruction, there are also stories of resilience, heroism, and humanity. The passengers of Flight 93 who fought back, knowing they would die, but preventing even greater destruction. The first responders who rushed into burning buildings to save others, many sacrificing their own lives. The ordinary citizens who helped strangers escape the chaos, carried injured people down dozens of flights of stairs, or simply held hands with terrified strangers as the towers fell. The communities that came together in the aftermath, across lines of faith and ethnicity, to support survivors and families of the dead. The countless Muslims who condemned the attacks and worked to counter extremism within their communities, often at great personal risk. September 11, 2001, revealed both the worst and the best of humanity. It showed that a small group of fanatics with twisted ideology could cause horrific suffering. But it also showed courage, compassion, and resilience in the face of tragedy. The immediate response of rescuers, the long-term dedication of those who worked at ground zero despite health risks, and the determination of a nation not to be terrorized demonstrated that violence, however shocking, could not break the human spirit. In the years since 9/11, counterterrorism has become a global priority. Intelligence agencies share information across borders. Financial networks are monitored to disrupt terrorist funding. Aviation security has been transformed. Law enforcement agencies have developed specialized counterterrorism units. These efforts have prevented numerous attacks and disrupted terrorist networks. Yet terrorism persists, evolving and adapting to countermeasures. New groups emerge, using social media for recruitment and propaganda. Lone wolf attackers, inspired by extremist ideology but acting independently, have proven difficult to detect and prevent. The question of how to effectively counter terrorism while preserving democratic values and civil liberties remains contentious. Enhanced interrogation techniques used on terrorism suspects, indefinite detention at Guantanamo Bay, mass surveillance programs, and drone strikes that kill civilians alongside militants have all generated fierce debate. Critics argue these measures undermine the very freedoms and values they claim to protect, potentially creating more terrorists than they eliminate. Defenders maintain they are necessary to prevent future attacks. Finding the right balance remains one of the central challenges of the post-9/11 world. Education and countering violent extremism programs have become important tools in preventing radicalization. Many communities have developed initiatives to provide alternatives to extremist narratives, offering young people positive identities and opportunities. Former extremists have become powerful voices against radicalization, sharing their stories to dissuade others from following similar paths. Addressing root causes, poverty, political oppression, lack of opportunity, and unresolved conflicts is increasingly recognized as crucial to long-term counterterrorism success, though progress has been slow and uneven. The geopolitical landscape has also been fundamentally altered by September 11th and its aftermath. America's global standing was initially strengthened by international sympathy, but the Iraq War and other controversial policies damaged that goodwill. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq stretched American military resources and weakened the United States' position relative to rising powers like China. The focus on counterterrorism also diverted attention from other global challenges like climate change, pandemic preparedness, and economic inequality, issues that may pose greater long-term threats than terrorism. For the Middle East specifically, the consequences have been catastrophic. The Afghanistan and Iraq wars, combined with the Arab Spring uprisings and subsequent crackdowns, have destabilized the region. Syria's civil war, which has killed hundreds of thousands and displaced millions, emerged partly from this context. Yemen remains embroiled in a devastating conflict. Libya descended into chaos after its civil war. Extremist groups have gained footholds across North Africa and the Sahel. While these conflicts have complex local roots, the ripple effects of 9/11 and the U.S. response contributed to the instability. The refugee crisis that emerged from these conflicts tested Western democracy's commitment to humanitarian values. Millions of Syrians, Afghans, Iraqis, and others fled violence and persecution, seeking safety in Europe and elsewhere. The response was mixed. Some nations welcomed refugees, while others closed borders and stoked anti-immigrant sentiment. The crisis became politicized, contributing to the rise of nationalist and populist movements in Europe and America. Brexit, the election of Donald Trump, and the strengthening of far-right parties across Europe were all influenced partly by fears and resentments related to immigration and Islam that trace back to 9/11. 23 years after the attacks, as we move further from that terrible day, younger generations have grown up in a world shaped by bin Laden's violence. They have never known air travel without invasive security screening. They have lived their entire lives of America at war. They have witnessed their governments collecting massive amounts of data on citizens in the name of security. For them, 9/11 is history, not lived experience. Yet his effects around them, from surveillance cameras on street corners to debates about immigration and religious freedom to ongoing military deployments overseas. The story of how one man unleashed the terror of September 11th is ultimately a cautionary tale about the danger of extremism, the power of ideology to motivate violence, and the vulnerability of even the mightiest nations to asymmetric threats. Osama bin Laden was not a military genius or strategic mastermind. The 9/11 plot succeeded largely because it was unprecedented and security agencies failed to imagine or prevent it. But he understood symbolism, propaganda, and how to exploit grievances. He recognized that spectacular violence could captivate global attention and provoke exactly the kind of overreaction that would serve his purposes. In his 1996 and 1998 fatwas, bin Laden claimed he wanted to drive American forces from Muslim lands and end U.S. support for Israel and corrupt Arab regimes. The attacks of September 11th achieved none of these goals. American military presence in the Middle East expanded dramatically. Israel's security situation improved relative to its neighbors, while Palestinians suffered further displacement and violence. Arab regimes, far from being overthrown by popular jihadist movements, mostly survived and in many cases strengthened their security apparatuses. Al-Qaeda itself was decimated, and bin Laden spent his final years as a hunted fugitive rather than the leader of a triumphant movement. Yet in another sense, bin Laden achieved something perhaps more insidious. He changed America and the world in ways that have proven difficult to reverse. The expansion of government surveillance, the normalization of perpetual war, the erosion of privacy and civil liberties, the increase in Islamophobia and religious intolerance, the diversion of vast resources from productive uses to security and military spending. These are all part of bin Laden's legacy. He may have failed to spark the global jihad he envisioned, but he succeeded in provoking a response that has cost trillions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of lives, and immeasurable damage to the social fabric of democratic societies. The challenge for present and future is learning the right lessons from 9/11. Security is important, but freedom and privacy matter too. Vigilance against terrorism is necessary, but so is understanding its root causes. Protecting against external threats is crucial, but maintaining internal cohesion and values is equally important. The easy path is fear, suspicion, and the sacrifice of liberties for the promise of safety. The harder but more rewarding path is maintaining open societies while developing smarter, more targeted approaches to security that protect both safety and freedom. As we reflect on how one man unleashed the terror of September 11th, we must remember that Osama bin Laden did not act in a vacuum. He was enabled by followers who shared his vision, by states that gave him sanctuary, by intelligence failures that allowed the plot to proceed, by grievances, some legitimate, many manipulated, that made his message resonate with some Muslims, and by a security apparatus that had not adapted to the threat of catastrophic terrorism. Understanding these enabling factors is crucial to preventing future attacks. But we must also remember what bin Laden could not destroy: the resilience of free societies, the courage of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, the bonds of humanity that transcend differences of nationality and religion, and a determination not to let terrorists dictate how we live our lives. The firefighters who climbed the stairs as others fled down, the passengers who fought back on Flight 93, the communities that came together in grief and solidarity, the survivors who rebuilt their lives. These represent the true human response to terrorism. Not surrender to fear, but the affirmation of life, hope, and shared values. The September 11 attacks remain the deadliest terrorist attack in human history and one of the pivotal moments of the 21st century. Understanding how they came to happen, the life and radicalization of Osama bin Laden, the formation and evolution of Al-Qaeda, the failures that allowed the plot to succeed, and the global forces that created conditions for such extremism, is essential to ensuring such a catastrophe is never repeated. But understanding is not enough. We must also act on that understanding, addressing the roots of extremism, protecting our societies without abandoning our values, and building a world where the grievances exploited by terrorists are addressed through justice rather than violence. Osama bin Laden is dead, killed by American forces in 2011, but the world he helped create through his violence lives on. The wars he provoked continue to generate casualties. The hatreds he inflamed still divide communities. The security measures implemented in response to his attacks still intrude on daily life. His legacy is not the global Islamic caliphate he dreamed of, but rather a world marked by suspicion, surveillance, and ongoing conflict. How future generations address this legacy, whether they perpetuate cycles of violence and repression or find ways to build security without sacrificing freedom, to address legitimate grievances without resorting to terrorism, and to recognize our shared humanity despite our differences, will determine whether 9/11 remains a turning point that led to darkness or the beginning of a long, difficult journey toward a more just and peaceful world. What do you think about the events that led to September 11th? Was bin Laden primarily motivated by religious ideology or political grievances? Could the attacks have been prevented with better intelligence sharing and security measures? How should democratic societies balance security and civil liberties in the fight against terrorism? Please share your thoughts in the comments section, and thank you for watching.